There's this cave in New Mexico that I used to visit often, back in the days when I was part of a motion picture film crew. This was before digital photography took over, so we relied on traditional film, which meant lugging around bulky equipment, massive lights with heavy battery packs, the only kind that can light up a space like that. The cave itself was something of a marvel, passages that twisted and turned like a labyrinth. But there was one room, deep inside, a chamber that the locals had warned us about. But you learn over time that locals love to say a lot of things when they realize you're filming in or around their territory. So we shrugged it off at first. It wasn't until we experienced it for ourselves that we understood what they meant. Every time we crossed into that room, something would happen. Call it unsettling or not, but our lights, no matter how powerful, would start to dim and flicker. It wasn't like the batteries were running low. It was more like something was feeding on the energy, draining it deliberately. At first we didn't think much of it other than better bring extra batteries, and that maybe it was a quirk of the cave's environment, some natural phenomenon that we couldn't explain. But the more we worked in the cave, the more it felt like something else was there too. Of course, none of us could reason with that, so avoidance became the norm. The first time it happened, we were caught off guard. The lights started to die one by one, and in the dim glow of these failing bulbs, shadows on the walls, taking on shapes that seemed alive. Though we weren't moving, nor was our equipment. We had to stumble out of that room in near darkness, the only light coming from the small, weak beams of our flashlights, which were barely enough to guide our steps. After that, we learned to be cautious. We made it a rule, never stop in that room, not even for a moment. We'd move through it quickly without a word. The silence between us was heavy, but I think we were all scared of something. And every time, without fail, as soon as we crossed into that chamber, the lights would start their eerie flickering. There were times when I swear I felt something watching us, presence just out of sight, just spying from the shadows that made up a majority of our surroundings. The hairs on the back of my neck would stand on end. I'd quicken my pace, eager to leave that room. I wasn't the only one who felt it. The others would glance nervously at the walls, their faces like mine, their breaths coming a little faster as we hurried through, like mine. We never spoke about it directly, not in the cave at least. But afterward, when we were safe in the light of day, we'd share a little. Ultimately, we all agreed that it was best not to talk about it. We were all level-headed people, but we knew whatever was in that cave was something best left undisturbed. Eventually, the project ended, and I, for obvious reasons, haven't been back to that cave ever since. But even now, years later, I can still feel the weight of that place. I've never worked on a film, let alone experienced anything in life quite like it. It's a memory that stays with you, one that makes you question what's real. But deep down, I know it wasn't just in our heads. There was something in that cave, maybe even something that didn't want us there. When I lived in Alta, we used to explore an old mine all the time. I practically lived in one of the old miners' quarters for a couple of years as we explored that creaky, drafty place and affectionately called it the mine. Creative, I know. If you've ever ridden the lift from the Germania side, you've probably gone right over it, though you'd never know it was there unless someone told you. The place had a history, and stories said that miners who worked those tunnels back in the day never truly left. They lingered, trapped in the darkness, their souls bound to the rock and ore that they spent their lives extracting. I didn't think much of it at first. I don't know if many do, Ghost stories were a dime a dozen in places like Alta, but there was something about those mines that made me feel like the tales weren't just stories. One time while we were poking around one of the deeper shafts, something happened that made me rethink everything I thought I knew about fear. We'd been exploring for hours, our headlamps casting these long, wavering shadows on the walls as we got deeper and deeper into the darkness. The air was thick, but also heavy, with the scent of damp stone and something else, something faint, like the lingering trace of old, forgotten things. We were just about to head back, our curiosity satisfied for the day, when the ground beneath our feet began to tremble. It started as a low rumble, barely noticeable, but quickly grew into something more violent. The walls shuddered, and a deep, echoing groan resonated through the tunnel, as if it were in pain. It was a small earthquake, just enough to send a shiver of fear down our spines, but what followed was worse. As we scrambled to exit, up the shaft, the ceiling above us began to crack and crumble. Before we could react, a section of the tunnel collapsed. It sent a cloud of dust and debris crashing all around us. For a moment, everything went dark. Clearly, our exit had just been covered. I could hear the others coughing and cursing through the sound of muffled, thick layers of dirt. We were trapped, buried underneath a mountain of rock, with only a few feet of space between us and certain death. Panic set in quickly for me, then the others. The weight of the earth pressing down on us was really suffocating. The realization that we might not make it out of here, that hit hard. The total darkness really didn't help much either. But we managed to communicate with each other, find each other. Miraculously, none of us were injured, so we began to dig our way out, each of us taking a section of what we thought was the entrance to the cave. We couldn't believe how much rubble had managed to make its way in front of us in such a small period of time. After a while of tossing rocks, I started to feel a bit hopeless. And then something strange happened. The darkness around us seemed to shift. It began to move in ways that didn't make sense. I was seeing darkness move against darkness. And then I could feel it. Something cold, something alive, brushing against my skin, tugging at my clothes. Maybe I was scared and imagining what I wanted, but I followed the direction of the coldness, looking down at my right leg. I saw the faintest of lights. I told the others to head in my direction. We needed to dig where this new light source was. That's our path out of here. And so we dug like our lives depended on it, which they did, really. The tunnel was unstable, and every movement sent more debris falling down. The hustle was necessary. And eventually, after what felt like hours, we broke through. The first breath of fresh air was like being reborn, the sunlight almost blinding after the darkness of the mine. We emerged, filthy, a little shaken, but very alive. After going through something like that, I think I can safely say that ghosts, or whatever you want to believe they are, aren't the scary ones. Not to me. In this case, that was for sure the earthquake. I've shared this story before. Locals don't like to hear this story. They like to say that we made something angry that day. I don't put a lot of weight into the idea that something might have caused the collapse, other than an earthquake. But I'll admit it's interesting to think about.